Stay frosty and head over to EasyMut.com for the cheapest MUT coins on the market. And when I say cheapest, I mean it. We're talking 1 million coins for around $40. Use code DIRECTOR for 5% off. Yo, what up, brothers? It's the Director. Chargers fans, we are winding down the month of June, which means football is just that much closer. But even now, at this point of the offseason, the Chargers still have some things they could do to improve the roster going into 2021. I think you guys know where I'm going with this, right? As it stands right now, the Chargers roster looks really, really solid. More specifically, from a starter standpoint, the starters at offensive line for the first time in forever look fantastic. The Chargers wide receivers, cornerbacks, defensive line, everything looks pretty dang good. The one area of concern that I do still have today, though, is going to be depth, and the Chargers still have time to do something in order to address that. Now, some of these free agents that are still available right now would have a bigger impact than others. For instance, there are some guys that could honestly slot in there as a starter, a rotational player, and have a pretty big impact for the 2021 season. Other players, I think, would offer the Chargers a nice contingency plan. As Chargers fans, we know all too often when it comes to luck, when it comes to the luck on the side of injuries, we are not on the good side of those things. And I think the best thing you can do in those situations is just be prepared. If something's going to happen, it's better to be prepared than not. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at a list of free agents that the Chargers could still add before kickoff in order to help them as far as depth and maybe even players that could have a big impact in 2021. Now, before we do get started, guys, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. The small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. And heads up, guys, I just secured some epic items for a new giveaway coming up very, very soon. So if you guys want a heads up on that, a leg up on that, make sure you guys are subscribed with that bell notification on. And with that, let's get into this one. Lights, camera, action. Potential free agents that the Chargers could still sign before kickoff of the 2021 season. Of course, guys, I want to make sure the objective here is depth, right? We want to make sure this team is well-rounded in the event of something disastrous happening as far as our starters. And I do think there are some awesome players still out there that the Chargers could pursue in order to accomplish that. Now, I'm going to go through all of these potential free agents and give you guys kind of like my sort of perspective on whether or not the Chargers should even pursue them. And as far as like the likeliness of any of these guys getting signed, the best answer I have for you is I don't know. I don't know what the Chargers are doing. As of right now, I think they've signed like 4 players from the spring league, so you never know what they're thinking as far as developing players into the starting roster. So with that, let's start with Geno Atkins, who was on the screen just a moment ago. Geno Atkins, age 33. I think could be an excellent add to this team. He's a disruptor up the middle. He's had an excellent career with the Cincinnati Bengals. As far as the Chargers, though, and this is something I might mention a little bit later too, the Chargers do have a player at his position that could definitely hold down the fort this year in Linval Joseph. Would we have maybe too many chefs in the kitchen? Would it be great to rotate both of them in and out? I don't know. I'll leave that to you guys in the comment section, but I think Geno Atkins on the roster, even at his age, could offer the Chargers some stability in the middle of the line where the Chargers do often find a lot of trouble, especially in containing the run. Maybe you could even play him at interior pass rush if you had to. Next up, let's take a look at a familiar face that a lot of Chargers fans have been asking me about over the course of the offseason, and Melvin Ingram. Now, Ingram, we know the potential of him. We also know the lack of potential with injuries last season. Of course, I don't blame Melvin too much for that. But, however, the Chargers do seem to be moving in a new direction. And the last thing I heard in regards to Melvin Ingram is that Tom Telesco says we are likely not going to revisit the idea of Ingram coming back to the Los Angeles Chargers. So I love Melvin Ingram, man, ASAP for life. But I do think Melvin Ingram will not be joining the Chargers again for the 2021 season. I think he still has something left in the tank and he could contribute this season. Maybe I would never close the book on the possibility, but from what we've heard, from Tom, I don't know know if it's going to happen. Next up, a guy that we've seen a lot of in the past couple of seasons from a division rival, Jerrell Casey, age 31. A little bit, yeah, older in the tooth. You'll see that with a lot of these guys on this list. But Jerrell Casey is an exceptional talent in a 3-4 defensive scheme, and I think you could play him at defensive end, nose tackle, wherever he would fit. I do think he's a great fit for this Los Angeles Chargers defensive line, and I do think adding him as a rotational player would add some depth and really help that Chargers defensive line really round out. Again, I would like 1 or 2 players that could really help hold down the fort in case something does happen, but Jerrell Casey, as it stands, would be a great rotational player, and especially against the run where the Chargers do have a lot of issues. Next up, taking a look at a player that struggled with injuries in 2021, a former New Orleans Saints, Quan Alexander. Now, as far as the Chargers linebacking unit, if you would have asked me last season, I would have been like, yeah, we're really good. We're really, really good. And honestly, we didn't do too terribly throughout the season. But of course, we did lose Drew Tranquil. Quan Alexander's the kind of guy that you would bring in just in case something would happen to that linebacking core. But at the same time, he has struggled with injuries. I'm not sure how much I want to bet on that. He's 27. He's still a really good player. So there may be a team out there that's willing to take a risk on him as more of an instant starter on anybody's team. He's a pretty good player, but again, staying on the field, very, very important. The Chargers starting linebackers are already pretty good. I'd want somebody that's really good at depth there as well. Next up, we got Justin Houston, age 32, former Indianapolis Colt, former Chief. I do think this guy is one heck of a football player, and at this point in his career, I don't know how much we would see him on the field as far as snap count, but you want to rotate him in, right? And I think the combination between Bosa, Nwosu, Houston, that would offer a really, really strong pass rush, and specifically in this new scheme where the Chargers will be relying on their outside linebackers or edge players to come in and create some pressure. I think Justin Houston, for what we would be asking him to do for the amount of time that we would need him to do it, could offer a lot of help to the Chargers pass rush, which in recent years has struggled, but we are going to see a change in mentality and how often we blitz the quarterback and the kind of packages we use to get to the quarterback. So Justin Houston, I'm all about it. I think that would be an awesome add to this team. Next up, speaking of pass rushers, you're going to see a couple of them on this list because I do think the Chargers need some help, especially at depth when it comes to pass rushers. We got Vic Beasley here, age 28. This guy's speedy, and that's something I really like from the edge position. He'd be a great short-term add, and especially for depth. I know he struggled in the past couple of years. I think he was a Vegas Raider the last time he was on a team, but I do think he still has a lot to add, and I do think the speed in which he offers on that defensive line could be utilized by a Brandon Staley in situations where you need somebody a little bit faster on that D-line. So I like Vic Beasley. I think he'd be a good add, and again, especially for depth, when you add a guy like this to the roster, again, if something happens, if Bosa needs a couple more plays on the sideline, if Nwosu at any point needs, sit out a game, maybe gets injured, I think Vic Beasley is the kind of guy that steps in. You're like, okay, I feel still all right about the Chargers pass rush. And again, in specific situations, his speed could offer a lot of versatility for Brandon Staley. Next up, we got a really talented player that honestly, guys, I wish the Chargers would consider signing if it hadn't been for his dramatic injury in January. I'm pretty sure in the postseason, torn Achilles, unlikely to play in 2021. Olivia Vernon, heck of a football player, had an awesome season with the Browns last year, but again, the likeliness to play in 2021 is very, very low. I don't think this is a player the Chargers should pursue at this point just because he's not going to really offer anything, and we'd have to sign him for a couple of seasons and hope that he comes back and plays in 2022. That's not what the Chargers need at this point in time. Next up, another player I get asked about constantly. Should the Chargers go after Richard Sherman? Cornerback, generational talent, the kind of guy that every cornerback aspires to be when entering the league. Richard Sherman is an incredible football player, an incredible human being, very, very intelligent. If you guys caught an interview with him and Brandon Staley a couple months back, it's very obvious that these two players, or these two humans, are on the same level. They really understand each other. They have a great chemistry. And honestly, just the thought of having these two in the same locker room, going working with the same team is very, very exciting. Is it exciting enough for me to want the Chargers to go pursue him? Actually, a little bit. As far as a fit, I'm not quite sure if Richard Sherman would play cornerback for us. He may be one of those more positionless players, playing safety, playing maybe nickel a little bit, maybe even a little bit of cornerback. but that's the best way I can feel, or I can see him fitting on the Chargers. Outside of that, I'm not sure that the age, the injuries, and the scheme fit are what the Chargers are looking for in a Richard Sherman right now. Honestly, I would be very excited if he joined the team, but I just don't know if he's the kind of fit for the Chargers at this point in time. But still, I would love to have those two football IQ brains in the Chargers locker room between him and Staley. That would be very, very exciting. Next up, speaking of cornerback, let's talk a little bit about Steven Nelson, a surprise cut from the Pittsburgh Steelers this last offseason. I see this guy as a tremendous talent, 28 years old, so he's still very young, very talented, and honestly, this is the kind of player that would get me excited about adding tremendous depth to this team. Of course, the Chargers' top 3 cornerbacks are very, very talented, but what happens after Chris Harris Jr. decides maybe to depart in 2022? Steven Nelson could definitely step in, and especially for this season, hold down the fort in case something were to happen and we need somebody to step in right away that could definitely contribute year one. I think Steven Nelson, even outside of a depth situation, could add a lot of playmaking potential to the Chargers defensive back core. So Steven Nelson, definitely one of those guys that's on top of my list of the Chargers potential free agents to pursue. Next up, a guy that's been I've been getting asked about a little bit in recent weeks, and Morgan Moses, 30 years old, right tackle. He's been nothing if not consistent for the Washington football team for very many years, and I do think that he still has a lot left in the tank. The issue here is, if we're going to be targeting a right tackle, or maybe a guy that can play, guard and tackle or something like that as a contingency plan for Brian Bulaga, this might be a little bit of overkill. I think there's a team out there that would be willing to pay Morgan Moses a lot of money to come hold down the fort for them at right tackle right away, whereas the Chargers likely use him in a situation where somebody goes down. And I think that the money it would cost in order to do that might be a little bit too much. Again, overkill for the Chargers at this point. I would love to have Moses on the team, but again, the price may not make sense for what we would use him for, but still not a bad option there. Next up, a player that honestly I'm surprised has not been signed at this point of the offseason, KJ Wright. This guy's been the spitting image of consistency at linebacker for a long time. 31 years old. The Chargers, again, in this new defensive scheme, he would be a tremendous fit. The only problem that I've heard as far as rumors with KJ Wright is that he still wants big money, even at 31 years old. As far as his effectiveness as a football player and stuff like that, I think it's still pretty high. He's playing at a pretty high level, but I don't know if I want to commit that kind of money to an aging player. I'd maybe rather save it, for 2022 and try and snag somebody a little younger that could have a longer term effect with the Chargers. But still, you can't overlook the talent of a KJ Wright and the kind of contribution he could make in 2021. Next up, we got a familiar face here in Trey Boston. Trey Boston, former Los Angeles Charger, former Carolina Panther. This guy, I think, is really underrated when it comes down to what he does for his team. And the Chargers did something very similar this last season with Jaleel Adai coming in. I don't see a reason why not to at least consider bringing in Trey Boston. If something were to happen to Nass or Derwin James, or somebody out there at that safety position, I would feel pretty good about Trey Boston stepping in. If in the event that Nass maybe starts underperforming again, maybe a Trey Boston could step in there and help us out at that position. I like Trey Boston a lot. Again, he's 28 years old, so he's not too old. He's familiar with some of the staff here in Los Angeles. I do think that the Chargers would be very intelligent in adding another safety, whether it be Boston or another guy that's really good as far as a depth piece. And I still think you could rotate Boston in every now and then to contribute right away. So I like Trey Boston a lot. He's, again, one of those top guys on my list for the Chargers to pursue. Next up, got to talk a little bit more about that offensive line. Let's take a closer look at Nick Easton, guard for the New Orleans Saints. He does have a connection to Joe Lombardi, our brand new offensive coordinator. And again, he's pretty decent as far as a depth option. The Chargers at this point at offensive line, as I stated before, really, really solid starters, but I want to make sure that if something were to happen, we've got guys ready to step in there and still play at a pretty decent level. I think Nick Easton's definitely the kind of guy I would target in order to make sure that depth is well-rounded. So Nick Easton, I don't think he would cost too much either. He's got connections to our coaching staff. I think he'd be an excellent add. Next up, this is a player that, again, I get asked about constantly, and Sometimes people get upset with my answer. Sometimes people are all about it. Let's talk a little bit about Todd Gurley, the man with the glass knees. Okay, guys, I get it. Todd Gurley, injury issues. The Chargers don't want to be adding a lot of players that maybe have those sort of question marks and red flags in their history. And I say all the time, the best ability is availability. But what you'd be asking Todd Gurley to do with the Chargers is not to be an every down back. This is going to be a guy that you bring out as a specialist, as a touchdown scoring specialist, as a red zone specialist, somebody that gives us a good shot at scoring on the ground in the red zone. And honestly, he's been doing a really good job of that, even in limited touches over the past couple of seasons. 21 touchdowns over the last 2 years with limited carries. I think his skill set very much so matches what the Chargers need. When you mix him in there with an Austin Eckler, I think you've got a really nice combination of running backs that would be both effective and complementary to one another. I think Todd Gurley, honestly, at this point would be a pretty decent add. If he goes down, next man up, we got a Kelly, we got a Jackson, we got a Roundtree. But I think if you want to score touchdowns on the ground, why not bring in a guy like Todd Gurley to do that? So honestly, I'm about it. Again, the injuries do concern me, but also you got to weigh the risks and rewards here. I don't think he's going to cost a lot of money, and I think what he does right really fits what the Chargers need. It's somebody that I would definitely consider. Next up, a player again that I'm really kind of shocked that hasn't been scooped up by another team, in Brian Poole, slot cornerback for the New York Jets. I think this guy would be an awesome fit with the Chargers. I don't know if fit is the right word, because the Chargers at this point, you're talking about slot cornerback. We've already got a couple cornerbacks that could play the slot very well, I think, in a Chris Harris Jr. and maybe even Asante Samuel Jr. So would Brian Poole be a good fit for this team as far as what we need? Maybe you could start playing Chris Harris Jr. outside a little bit more, but as far as scheme fit, not so sure. But he's young, he's talented, only 28 years old. I think he would be a pretty good add for this squad. Next up, let's talk a little bit about a guy that maybe some football fans have forgotten, and Damon Snacks Harrison, age 32, so again a little bit older, but not too old to make an impact in my opinion. Excellent 3-4 nose tackle. The guy is huge. The Chargers, as I've stated several times in this video, maybe struggle a little bit in stopping the run. Who better, in my opinion, to add to stop the run, or at least help affect that area of the defense, than Damon Harrison? Now, the issue, once again, I said I would mention this again, Joseph and Snacks kind of offer the same thing, right? So would there be too many chefs in the kitchen? I'm not quite sure. Again, given the age of both players, maybe good to rotate them in and out, especially when it comes to adding resources in order to stop the run. I think I'd be all about a Damon Harrison. He took a really cheap contract with the Green Bay Packers last offseason, or in the middle of the season, I do believe. I think I'd be pretty comfortable in adding him before kickoff of the 2021 year. And finally, a player that I get asked about constantly over the past couple of weeks, LeVeon Bell. In the comment section, I want you guys to tell me what you think about LeVeon Bell, because it's kind of on and off depending on who you ask. Some people still say, maybe he didn't get a fair enough chance in Kansas City to really prove that he still has, something in the tank. Definitely not the same running back we saw back in Pittsburgh. He was maybe underutilized, or maybe a lack of production with the New York Jets. I don't know how their offensive line fared for him, because honestly, he was going from a pretty decent offensive line with the Pittsburgh Steelers to a pretty poor one with the Jets. Would he be able to add something in terms of production for the Chargers? Maybe. Again, I stated this a couple of videos ago. I think Austin Eckler, the best version that we've seen of him, was when we did have a Melvin Gordon as well. So maybe adding a guy like LeVeon Bell would benefit the roster a little bit, but honestly at this point I'm not quite sure. LeVeon Bell, to me, I think it's a production thing for me. I don't know if I'd be too excited about LeVeon. I think it would be good for Austin Eckler, but when it comes to what the Chargers need, I think I still lean towards a Todd Gurley. So in the comment section below, let me know which one of these free agents that you still think the Chargers should pursue before kickoff, and maybe any that I didn't mention in this video. Also, maybe mention some players the Chargers might be willing to trade for. I still think there's a possibility that some big names would be on the move before kickoff this season. Maybe the Chargers could be in conversations. I'm not quite sure on that front, but I do think there's one thing I'm very certain about. The Chargers need to add some depth, especially at positions like offensive line, cornerback, DB, stuff like that. I think the Chargers should do something to bring in some quality depth before kickoff this year. We have a really well-rounded roster as far as starters, but we need to be prepared for stuff to happen. Maybe even have guys like Steven Nelson that could contribute outside of the depth department. So with that, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. We'll see you next time. If you like this content, hit us up with a like and sub on the way out. This has been The Director. We'll see you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay frosty.